Trump's final warning is here: 100% tariffs if Canada signs with China. This isn't just a trade dispute, it is the potential end of the North American Economic Alliance as we know it. President Donald Trump has issued an explicit ultimatum to Ottawa, threatening to treat our closest ally and neighbor not as a partner, but as a hostile economic combatant. If this threat creates policy, the longest undefended border in the world essentially closes to commerce, shattering supply chains from Detroit to Texas. But why now? On the surface, this looks like a reaction to a canola and electric vehicle agreement, but that is just the cover story. The real trigger, the detail that the mainstream headlines are glazing over, is a specific accusation Trump made about what Canada is actually becoming. He didn't just call it a bad deal, he called Canada a drop-off port. Most analysts are looking at the price of lumber or oil. I'm going to show you the geopolitical map that reveals why the White House believes Canada has effectively defected from the North American security bloc, and why the president just referred to the prime minister of a sovereign nation as a governor. Let's look at the raw data of this ultimatum. On Saturday, January 24th, President Trump took to Truth Social to deliver a message that sent shockwaves through the G7. He stated, clearly and without ambiguity, quote, "If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA." Note the word all. He is not targeting specific sectors like steel or aluminum, as we saw in his first term. This is a blanket threat of total economic severance. For context, Canada sends roughly 75% of its exports to the United States. A 100% tariff on that volume is not a penalty. It is an economic death sentence. What triggered this nuclear option? It centers on a new agreement between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Beijing. The terms seem modest on paper. China lowers tariffs on Canadian canola, and in exchange, Canada allows 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the country annually, slashing the tariff rate on them from 100% down to just 6%. And that is the breach. By lowering the gate for Chinese EVs, the White House argues that Canada is creating a backdoor into the North American market. The fear is not just about 49,000 cars in Montreal or Toronto. The fear is that Canada becomes the drop-off port, a transshipment hub where Chinese goods are washed of their origin labels and slipped into the United States duty-free. Trump's language was visceral. He warned that China would, quote, "eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life." This brings us to the personal escalation. In his statement, Trump referred to the Canadian Prime Minister not as Prime Minister Carney, but as Governor Carney. This is a calculated diplomatic insult. Mark Carney is the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. By calling him governor, Trump is implying he's merely a technocrat, or worse, a subordinate administrator, rather than a head of state. It frames the relationship not as a partnership between equals, but as a dispute between a president and a rebellious state official. But here's the twist that makes this situation explosive. Just 1 week ago, Trump supported this deal. When news of the Canada-China talks first broke, Trump told reporters, quote, "If you can get a deal with China, you should do that." He gave it his blessing. So what changed in 7 days to turn a blessing into a 100% tariff threat? The answer lies in Davos, Switzerland. Between that endorsement and this threat, Mark Carney gave a speech at the World Economic Forum that the White House interpreted as a direct attack on American hegemony. Carney declared that the U.S.-led order is over and that middle powers must band together. He explicitly rejected Trump's assertion that Canada lives because of the United States, countering that Canada thrives because we are Canadian. This rhetoric turned a trade disagreement into a loyalty test. And it's not just about speeches. We have to look at the Arctic. While this trade war heats up, Trump has been pushing for the Golden Dome, a missile defense system over Greenland.
Canada has opposed this project. In the president's eyes, Ottawa is simultaneously rejecting American security protection in the north and opening its southern doors to America's primary economic rival. The timeline confirms this linkage. Trump explicitly connected the two in his Saturday posts, stating that Canada voted against the Golden Dome and voted for doing business with China. In his view, these are not separate issues. They are evidence of a strategic realignment by Canada away from Washington and toward Beijing. The contrast in how Trump is handling his allies is stark. On the very same weekend he threatened to crush the Canadian economy, he canceled threatened tariffs on Europe. Why? Because NATO and the EU agreed to a framework regarding Greenland and Arctic security. Europe fell in line with U.S. security interests, and the economic pressure was released. Canada stood firm on its sovereignty and pursued independent ties with China, and the economic pressure was maximized. The message is binary and brutal. You are either part of the American fortress or you are outside the walls. There is no middle ground for middle powers. To summarize, the United States has placed a 100% tariff gun on the table. The trigger is the implementation of the Canada-China EV deal. Prime Minister Carney is now in an impossible bind. If he cancels the China deal, he looks weak at home and validates Trump's governor label. If he proceeds, he risks the complete collapse of the Canadian economy, which relies on access to the U.S. market to survive. The era of the polite, unguarded neighborhood is over. The U.S.-Canada border is no longer just a line on a map. It has become the new front line of the economic Cold War. And right now, the United States is ready to close the gates.